After praying, Jesus crosses the Kidron Valley with his disciples and they stop at a garden. Judas knew that Jesus would go there, so he also shows up leading a group of religious leaders and soldiers to arrest Jesus. Jesus goes up to them and asks, "What do you want?" They ask for Jesus of Nazareth, and he says, "I am." When he says, "I am," the mob falls over backwards, including Judas. Then he's like, "Who did you say you wanted again?" And they stand up and say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I told you, I am." And he tells them that if it is him that they want, then they should let the disciples go. But Peter runs forward with a sword and cuts off the right ear of the high priest's servant, a guy named Malchus. But Jesus commands Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then they arrest Jesus and bind him and bring him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas is the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Peter and another disciple are following Jesus, and because this disciple was known to the high priest, he goes with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter has to wait outside at the door. The other disciple comes back, speaks to the servant girl on duty there, and brings Peter in. She asks Peter if he is also a disciple, and he denies it. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questions Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus replies, "I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." When Jesus says this, one of the officials nearby slaps him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demands. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replies, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sends him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Meanwhile, Peter is still standing there warming himself, so they ask him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Again, Peter denies it, and at that moment, a rooster begins to crow. Jesus is then taken to Pilate, the Roman governor, but the Jews refuse to enter the palace because that would make them ceremonially unclean for the Passover meal, and they apparently didn't think plotting murder would also make them ceremonially unclean. So Pilate has to come out to them to see what in the world they want at that hour of the morning, and he asks them what the charges are against Jesus, and they say his charge is that he is a criminal. Seeing as how they can't find an example of any Roman law that Jesus broke, Pilate tells them all to go away and settle their own problems themselves. But they protest, saying they want permission to execute Jesus. So Pilate has Jesus brought inside where they can talk alone. Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus responds, "Did you come up with that yourself, or did you hear that from someone else?" And Pilate's like, "Am I a Jew? Your own people handed you over to me. What did you do?" Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." And Pilate's like, "So you are a king then?" And Jesus says, "You say you're a king, but in fact, the real reason I was born and came into this world was to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Pilate's like, "Oh, what is truth anyway?" And he goes back out to the Jews to reason with them. At this point, we learn that it was traditional for a prisoner to be released once a year at the request of the people. We also learn that there was, at this time, a known terrorist and murderer locked up in prison named Jesus Barabbas. Pilate uses this opportunity to ask the crowd who they would like to release, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus Christ. But the crowd is like, "No, give us the terrorist, set Barabbas free." Then Pilate takes Jesus and has him flogged. The soldiers twist together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothe him in a purple robe, slap him in the face, and go up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Pilate brings Jesus out to the crowd again, insisting that there is no grounds for the death penalty. But as soon as the chief priests and their officials see him, they shout, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate is like, "You crucify him, I don't want to." The Jewish leaders insist, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate hears this, he's even more afraid, and he goes back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asks Jesus, but Jesus gives him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate says. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" And Jesus answers, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From this point on, Pilate tries to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders keep shouting, "If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate hears this, he brings Jesus out and sits down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. John tells us that it was about noon at this point on the day of preparation for the Passover, and Pilate says, "Here is your king," and the people scream, "Crucify!" Pilate asks them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And and the priests cry out, "We have no king but Caesar." So finally, Pilate hands him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers take charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he goes out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucify him, and with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate has a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It reads, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read the sign, for the place where Jesus is crucified is near the city, and the sign is written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protest to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answers, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucify Jesus, they take his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. John says that they liked the undergarment so much that they cast lots to see which one of them would get it, and that this fulfilled what was prophesied in Psalm 22. Near the cross of Jesus stood 3 Marys: his mother Mary, his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus sees his mother there and the disciple whom he loves standing nearby, probably John, he says to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, Jesus says, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar is there, so they soak a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lift it to Jesus' lips. Jesus says, "It is finished," and he dies. Now, the Jewish leaders didn't want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, so they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. So the soldiers come and break the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they come to Jesus and find that he is already dead, they don't break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierces Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. John writes that he himself witnessed this event, and he is writing about it so that the reader will come to believe. He also says that all these things happened to fulfill what the prophets had said. Not one of his bones will be broken, and they will look on the one they have pierced. Later, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a secret disciple of Jesus, asks Pilate for the body of Jesus. He and Nicodemus come and take the body away and cover it with myrrh, spices, and aloes, and wrap it in strips of linen. At the place where Jesus is crucified, there is a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it is the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb is nearby, they lay Jesus there.